It's about the dynamic between an actor and a character and how they are affected by playing someone other than themselves. And there's a whole spectrum of effects that I want to be studying. And for the study, I researched a bunch of ways that an actor is affected by the characters that they portray. And I wanted to study this because I'm an actor too, and so I have felt the effects, some of the effects, and my friends have had different experiences, some of them being similar to mine, some of them being wildly different, so I was interested to interview loads of people and find out what everyone's shared experiences are, what's like specific to a person, and my hypothesis was just generally that there are a lot of effects, and because I had thought that was going to be the truth, I wanted to study as many as possible. So for my methodology, I couldn't just send out like a survey about one thing because I didn't want to have any leading questions. So I wanted to get really in-depth. I wanted to leave it open-ended too so that someone could describe their experiences. So I did a series of interviews that were kind of like case studies because I had different interview questions for each person. And it was a convenient sample because it was everyone in my acting class that I was pulling from, but it was also kind of like a quota sample because I was picking the people that I knew would have like the richest stories. And I conducted 6 interviews, and they followed 4 subtopics. So I did typecasting and high school theater, and those I each did a male and female actor because I figured those 2 topics would have different experiences depending on your gender. And also method acting, which we'll get into the definitions of that, and acting with a larger audience and like fandoms and how being in the limelight can affect that dynamic between an actor and a character and the differentiation between them, because sometimes that's quite blurry. And I thought my study was reliable and valid because it asks clear questions pertaining to my research question, because it is pretty broad as research questions, so they all fall under that umbrella. But I did try to leave them open-ended enough that the interviewees could go on tangents and like really describe their experiences. They wouldn't be limited to like one very specific question. And so these are my findings, and I've separated them by subtopic. So for typecasting, the female person that I interviewed was a blonde teenage girl, and as you might have guessed, she is typecast as like the mean girl. And she doesn't feel like this represents her, but it is what people's first impressions are. So when we were talking, I interviewed her, and she's like, because she's very shy when you first meet her, but she dresses in like Chanel clothes and has like blonde hair that's always in a high ponytail, so people, because she's shy, they usually think she's like standoffish. And after the interview, I was discussing it with my friends, and they're like, oh, that's all what we thought of you in the beginning. So that's, casting directors only meet you once for 15 minutes, so that's their first impression. And the problem with it is she's gotten comfortable inside this box, so this is what she's always cast as, so it's the only thing she gets practice in. And then because it's the only thing she gets practice in, it's the only thing that she hones her skill in. And so because that's the thing that she's best at, then she gets cast like that again, and the cycle continues. And because all this seemed quite negative, I asked her if there was any positive effects of typecasting, and she said that it gets you more roles because a casting director will read like the Regina George of this movie and be like, I know Casey would be great for this. Like it's like they'll know they know to look for you instead of just being like an arbitrary person. They're like, okay, maybe we'll choose them, but they know to go to you. But then also it's like you're the perfect person to play this mean girl. So it can have effects on your self-esteem when they tell you that you're like great to be a mean girl, but also then you're getting cast and getting paid. So there's 2 sides to that. And then for the guy that I interviewed, he said he's always cast very specifically as either the gay character or the suicidal character. And this fit, he was talking about his childhood, and that was sort of the stuff that he was going through. And he, sort of as like a defense mechanism, he would project those kinds of things and talk about those kinds of things as sort of like a defense mechanism, because if he talked about it first, no one could talk behind his back. And because of that, that's what he got typecasted in his younger years, but now he's evolving into a different person, and his typecast remains. So he's sort of been kept in that box. And because it's such like a niche typecast, his auditions are very few and far between. He gets like 3 auditions a year. But when he gets those auditions, he has very little competition because not as many people have that like niche that they're good at. But he still wasn't getting as many auditions as he'd like to, so he decided he was going to change this and remodel his life to make himself more marketable in the acting industry. And that I saw him go through this transformation, and it was crazy, so I asked him to elaborate on that, and I just included his quote because I feel like he said it better than I could summarize it. He said, "I've had a lot of hard conversations with my parents and agents about my type, and what I've ended up doing makes me kind of angry. I've completely shifted the way I behave in real life. I present more neutral in all forms. For example, I had my hair dyed for a while, and I don't have dyed hair anymore. I had hair where it was short on the sides because that was in, and they told me not to do that because it's not as marketable. I completely changed the manner in which I speak, and the inflections, the resonance, the way I stand, the way I shift weight. Those are all things you change for a role, but what I had to do was kind of change all of that in my real life. I completely changed who I was in order to be a more marketable type." So he did all of these things to sort of water down his personality to be more moldable into more characters. So he gets more auditions now, but he's not that like rich form of himself that he was maybe 2 years ago. So that was typecasting. And then high school theater. This was a very interesting thing for me to study because high school theater programs are such like an interesting like microcosm of Hollywood, and like the hierarchies, like you have the A-listers and the people that are always there but always in an ensemble, and the people that are just trying to get in. Like it really is interesting, and you can study that dynamic more easily because it's 300 people instead of 300,000 people. And the female that I interviewed, she always gets like the higher, like more lead roles now. But when she was in middle school, she was just trying to break into this like local theater program. So she has seen all the different levels and lived all of them. And she said that leads are more socially accepted than the ensemble. And so like if you're playing Belle in Beauty and the Beast, everyone's going to love you. Everyone's going to say, "Oh, you're doing so well." But if you're in the ensemble, people might not even know your name. And it's weird. She mentioned how weird she thought this was because there's so many non-personal factors that go into casting. Like I probably wouldn't get Belle because I have red hair, but someone that's brunette might get it. And even if we had the same skill set, they would be treated better because they looked the part. So there's a lot of non-personal factors that go into it, but the way you're treated is very personal. And another thing that I wanted to sort of research under the high school theater umbrella is onstage relationships, because relationships in high school, when you're in like a more like social, traditional high school, are like super scrutinized. So I asked her about that, and she said it's all about communication between the scene partners. So if you know where you stand, talk about it before, like you have to do a scene or whatever, you have to communicate that to each other, communicate that to everyone else, and if everyone is mature, it's not a problem. The problem sort of gets introduced when you have more immature people that don't understand it, that come to a show and watch you, and then you don't even get to talk to them and clarify. So that can be a problem, but as long as everyone's professional, nothing can be awkward, as long as you know that it's just a script, like you are following instructions for the sake of a role. And because of the professionalism aspect, when you get older, it tends to be less hard, because if you have to kiss someone on stage in 6th grade, everyone's going to be like, huh, but that's how that goes. So when I interviewed a guy, it was interesting because when I was talking to girls about high school theater, it was very much, if they had been judged for something, they were judged for their character and what their character did. Guys are judged by participating in theater in general. So their masculinity is immediate.